Before we get to that, I'm going to welcome on our panelists today. Mike, how are you doing this morning? Afternoon? Is it afternoon already for you?
Afternoon by 4 minutes and 22 seconds.
How you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing well. I am ready for a weekend.
Oh, yes. Yes, I bought a bunch of new like rakes and shovels and grass seed, so I've got good plans in my backyard this weekend. So Mike's like, that's not what I meant.
Sounds serious, eh?
It is.
Spring cleaning outside.
All right, so I gotta tell you, I am super excited for this weekend because for the first time in a long time, I'm going to play golf tomorrow.
Oh, nice. Are you like good at it? Are you like actually?
Right now, I will say no. However, in a prior life, I was good at the sport. So I'm looking to work towards getting back to that.
Amazing. I want to welcome to the stage our beautiful guest of honor today, Tomas, or Thomas, as some call him, Trajan. Welcome, darling. How are you doing this lovely? What time is it for you? Local.
It's like early evening, like 6 p.m. But thank you, Alyssa. Doing great. Very happy to be here again with you at Angular Air. So I'm looking forward to all the discussions and all this cool stuff. But maybe like a quick intro for the people from the community. As we established, we have a lot of new people in the community, and we are very happy about that, right? So my name is Tomas Trajan, and I'm a Google developer expert for Angular. And I like to say that like I build, teach, write, and speak with and about Angular. So then, like if you want to see like the stuff we are doing, check out angularexperts.io. We have a free blog. We do like consulting with companies worldwide, speaking at conferences and meetups, all this kind of stuff, open source as well, workshops, all the usual, helping community and companies around the world.
Very cool. I'm rotating through all of the amazing people who are hyping up the show and the episode, and your guestages. Is guestages a work, Mike? Your guest appearance. There we go.
Today it is.
Today it is. Right.
Hello, everybody in the chat. Please keep the hype coming, as well as any questions as we get into our topic for today.
Not to call you out like first things here, Alyssa, but you totally didn't share my message, but that's okay.
Pardon, good sir. I thought it would be biased because, like, you're on the show. Like, I would.
It's okay. It's one of the perks of being on the show, right?
You can call it out. Hey.
Yeah, you could. All right. So today we are talking about modern Angular CRUD, right? Is that the direction we're going with our topic?
I would say so. I think like it would be worthwhile to like do like a little bit of a recap of history, how we got here, to like set the stage for what we may be unveiling. But we would like to get into the direction of like how potentially we could do modern CRUD in Angular with like all the latest, greatest, shiniest patterns and so on. And hopefully we even get like official support from the Angular team, but we will see, right? But I think, you never know, right? There was an RFC, there were 2 RFCs. And
now listen, you heard it here. He promised it. We're getting support.
I cannot speak on their behalf. I can just wish, but there were some nice comments in those 2 RFCs for the resource. So there is some hope. But, basically...
Yeah, I want to set the stage for later, though, because I'm interested in having the conversation about how much of the 4 letters of CRUD can get solved by the HTTP resource. If we're just talking R, if we're also talking the C, U, and D.
Exactly, and we would all wish that we get all 4 letters, but in the meantime, we can try to build something on our own which could compose with the HTTP resource or RX resource.
I'm looking forward to it.
But hey, so the thing is, I think it would be very worthwhile to basically explore a little bit how we did it before and like why do we even have a resource nowadays, right? It's like what kind of problems are we solving? How is it different to what we were doing before? So and if we think about it, we still have and had from the start like the HTTP client, which allows us to perform like the request, right? You could do the get, the post, the put, the delete, and for the sake of simplicity, we will say we have like an ideal REST API, which does all the expected things. So it removes the items with the delete requests and updates the items with like the puts and creates with the posts, which of course is not always the case, right? But let's just say we have this. Now let's just focus on the read, right? So we had the HTTP client, and the HTTP client, we could provide some kind of URL. So like, whatever, www.myorganization/customers, and I would get the list of the customers, right? And then some people figured out that instead of wrapping this in a method, if we just store it in a property, then we load it once and we can share it everywhere, right? But that only works for like the whole collection, and sometimes the collection is too large to load at one time. Like it's not always possible, right? So, or we just wanted to load like one item, like get customer by ID or something like that. And then, we had this HTTP client, and we would create a service, and in that service, we would have this method, get customer by ID, and then we would call this method and, maybe subscribe or return or whatever. But the question is, like, what happens like behind the scenes? Like, how are we creating the requests? What kind of abstract behavior, which we are going to discuss a bit more, is in the place, right? Because those behaviors are very, very impactful. And as we will see, like it changes from HTTP client with methods to the resource to HTTP resource or something like a CRUD resource. And that kind of is like the whole meat behind the scenes why this is a topic in the first place. So if we think about it, right, like we had like this, or let's switch to the example, we have like a search, right? We search for like a customer by name. And as we search, we perform like these requests. And here we have to think about what happens behind the scenes. We are making these requests in parallel, right? As we type, we trigger those requests, and those requests are fired, and they are happening at the same time. So then we could say, if we had like this kind of method which wraps HTTP GET, we had a implicit merge behavior because they would happen all at the same time. And as it turns out, this is not really ideal when fetching data, because then we could suffer from the race conditions, right? Did you guys experience that in your, development career, that you had like this kind of bugs where you were loading data and you seen like out of sync response?
Definitely experienced it, and I've tried to push it out of my memory.
I know. Whenever you said race conditions, I just got like marble diagram PTSD of like.
Oh yeah, or bugs in production PTSD, flaky screens in like not in PTSD, in production, and therefore PTSD. But so you see, so these kind of things happen. But what is like the key information here is that even if we don't know we have some kind of behaviors, that doesn't mean they are not there, right? So it's like not knowing about something doesn't make it go away. The behavior will happen, and the problems because of that behavior will also happen. And then we might get a little bit traumatized, and then we want to solve it, right? So and this is like one of those things which is like the largest difference between just having like a HTTP client HTTP clients service which wraps the HTTP client, and we call the method like search by name, and we keep calling that method because I think we have to bring up that comment, like
the production tragedy stress disorder.
Oh yeah, I like that. I think we have to bring it to the vocabulary of the company. But so we have this like HTTP client. We call the method. We call it many times, and we make those requests in parallel, and we suffer from the race condition because the implicit behavior is merge. It's called like merge, right? And like basically like those names for those behaviors, I actually don't know where they came from. Most like some computer science things, like greatest mind came up with that. But you could say like, when it's something in parallel happens at the same time, then the behavior is merge. Now, what happens if we use latest resource, Rx resource, or HTTP resource? So, there we can also basically have this request property, which might be renamed to params after the RFC. And there we can reference some signals. So let's say we reference like a search query signal. And as we type, we make those requests, but now we are not suffering from the race condition. So how is that possible? Well, because implicitly behind the scenes, the resource implements a switch behavior, right? So this is kind of like the main difference, that with this new API, we are optimizing for like the best case scenario, or not the best case scenario, but like for a very reasonable default, because whenever we fetch, most likely we are only interested in like the latest response. And therefore we get this switch behavior, which basically means forget everything which happened before and only focus on the last one, automatically out of the box behind the scenes, right? So we already see that this is kind of like a very positive evolution of like the first class API support from the Angular, where they switched that, or not switched, like changed the implicit behavior from merge, or like the standard pattern from merge to switch, which gives us like the newer generation of the developers will not suffer from the production strategy stress disorder, especially in this kind of scenario, right? So what about you guys? Can you share like some stories, like how you experienced this switch in the API? Like when did it click for you? Because for me it took like a while. I had to play with it, open like the dev tools, check the network requests. Like it was not for me completely clear out of the box.
My understanding of Switch was fairly solid, but really hit home when I worked on a talk at NGConf with Shai Resnick and Pete Bacon-Darwin. We did a whole, it was much longer than the 20 minutes. It was probably about 25, 30-minute talk on nothing but switch map with some real life scenarios and what have you. So it really sunk in which goes back to the old adage, if you really want to understand something, teach it to somebody else, because that forces you to totally understand it yourself. So that's when everything really clicked for me.
I remember that episode, the session. It felt like an episode. I also remember you practicing for it in the hotel room. It was very entertaining to watch. I personally still get confused, honestly, especially with not as much with switch maps, but with some of the more complex things with composing data. I get in over my head, and I have to take it slower than I would like.
Right. So that's another big deal about this, that when it's provided out of the box, we don't have to learn it, right? Because we get the correct behavior without even knowing that there is such a thing, which is definitely very helpful for the people who want to get into framework and get the least amount of bugs possible also for these advanced cases. So this is actually very, very nice. And maybe one thing which we can also mention is that before we had the resource, that was basically Mike and Alyssa mentioned, is that we would solve it with the switch map, right? We would have to, when we would do this kind of requests, for example, to search for something, and we would know that we are doing multiple requests at the same time, we would probably need to streamify that request, kind of like what the HTTP resource does, with the signals when you define this request function where you reference those signals. Previously, we would have to streamify it as RxJS stream and then use that switch map operator explicitly, right? So we would be in control of what kind of behavior we want. And of course, when we were fetching the data, most likely we would go with the switch map. But now this kind of provides us with a very nice opportunity to explore all those primitive behaviors which are available, right? So we already spoke about when we just had the method wrapping HTTP client get, that was an implicit merge behavior. That means things in parallel, they are happening at the same time, right? So we have merge behavior, merge map in RxJS. Then we discuss the switch behavior or switch map in RxJS, which basically means we want to forget everything which happened before and only focus on the last one, which is amazing when we want to load the data. And again, this is the default behind the scenes in the resource, Rx resource, and HTTP resource. And then another very common one is concat, or when we do things serially. So one thing happened, and only when this one is finished, then we do the other thing. And only when this is done, then we do the other thing, right? So one after the other. And then we can think about where these kind of behaviors, and there is one more, but more on that later. It's not really important. I used it once in last 7 years. So let's ignore that one. It's called exhaust. We don't need to speak about that one. But those three are pretty common, right? So we established already when we load the data, the switch is most likely the way to go in terms of behaviors because we want the last response. So now what about create, update, delete, right? So probably we do not want to switch like when we create stuff, because what if we want to create 5 items and like the REST API doesn't support an endpoint where we can send all 5 together. So we have to send one after the other, and then we would use switch map, and basically we would probably even be able to cancel first for one because they even went out. So we are not creating those items, right? So there we would probably want to go with merge, like in parallel, or with concat, one after the other. How we would know? Usually, like the best way to think about it is, does it matter on the back end in which order they were created? So this would usually be in a case when you have something like a timestamp for like a audit trail. Like imagine you are creating trades. Well, then it probably matters, like in which order those trades arrived to server and like how they were executed. So there it really depends on the use case, and that way you can know like which kind of behavior you would want, right? So, and let's just say we want to do like this create of trades, right? And we would like to go with a concat behavior, but we only have a resource which is for loading, and we have the HTTP client which is for, create, update, delete currently. And we also established that when we call the methods multiple times, create trade 1, trade 2, trade 3, that the implicit behavior is merge and not concat. And what do we do now, right? So already it gets a little bit tricky. And that's something which shows us that one thing is like the API. Okay, we have HTTP client, we have the resource, but the other thing is this concern of the behaviors and what we want to achieve, and how we could bring those things together in a way that it's standardized, easy to use, and easy to understand. But I hope that like we were able to show that like these behaviors are there even if we maybe were not thinking about them before, and that they are important. What about you guys? Like, have you had like a use case where you experienced this, that you were, for example, created things in parallel and then you had to switch to like do it serially because the order mattered, or the other way around, you had the performance problems because maybe you were deleting the items, and instead of like, being able to click on all of them at the same time, you had to wait until the first request finishes and only then the other one would start? Because I've seen both in the wild.
I haven't run into specific bugs with those, but again, having some knowledge and experience of using RxJS to be able to compose those things and allow them to flow through as expected, I haven't run into that in production, but I have had to control whether or not things are done at the same time or if they have to wait.
Right. Makes sense. So we had this case like recently where it was exactly like something very simple. Like you were able to like favorite items, right? You had like a long list, and there was a concat map, and plus the loading was blocking the UI. So you can imagine that like a changing of like a one-liner, well, not just one-liner, also like that blocking of the UI with the loading flag, that these two places led to like a massive improvements in like user experience for that specific use case. Right.
Yeah. I just had to worry about loading order actually just yesterday, except the API that I'm using is all promise-based, so no observables. But the idea of, well, I need to do these two different things, but it would be better to do them at the same time because they're two different fetches and they're not dependent upon each other. So basically use the power of promises and then the promise tot all, or
right.
a double await later on. Allows you to take advantage of the fact that they're asynchronous and can run in parallel.
That's actually like a very good point, because we didn't mention promises yet, but actually many folks are still using promises, right? We can be like using fetch or like maybe some Axios or whoever, what kind of library. So maybe we can also explore like the promises from the point of view of those behaviors to really demonstrate that like these concepts exist regardless of like if it's a resource, RxJS, promise, whatever kind of asynchronous operations we are performing, like these behaviors will apply, right? So I think like with the promises, as you said, for example, when we would have like a method which just fires a promise, and we do this, like if we would like, load the item by ID and we would call this method multiple times, that would be kind of the same like with the HTTP client. So we would do it in a parallel. But if we want to do it like in parallel together, as you said, we could do promise.all, right? And we can like maybe await that. Would there be also something like how to do it serially nicely with promises, like how we would achieve like a concat behavior there without like probably like with the then waterfall or something like that?
The way that it was working was in parallel, but it was using a wait. So, which is basically it creates the essentially .thens for you.
That's true. So if we have like multiple lines of wait, that's basically concat behavior because
And
we wait
most
for
apps that I've worked on do exactly what Mike's saying, but I feel like it's super like observables and RxJS. It's all very popular, but I'm like, I don't know, Mike, is it just my small experience on would you say the majority, do you guys think of people are using promises? Because I feel like that's not the case.
No,
I think being what Angular is almost 10-ish years old now.
I thought it was like
Releases a year,
15.
20's
It's
coming
10?
soon.
Wait, what?
it's 16 it came out, right?
I think that sounds about right.
Yeah.
2 releases a year, divide the release number by 2. So math. Anyway. I think the majority of Angular applications are using observables at this point. Our backend team where I'm working right now provides an SDK, and everything there is promise-based because it's being used in multiple frameworks. You can't rely on anything. They didn't want to rely on any other third-party library, so it's all just promise-based. So
right,
I'm using that.
Oh, we lost
trying to reset
Alyssa.
the fuzz. I'll just be fuzzy for now.
And she's back. All right. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I just realized like, my mouse has just died, which is amazing.
Her camera, your mouse.
We're all having issues, man. I'm here.
No, it moves, it doesn't click, and
I did want to highlight in the chat. I had an issue like this with a shopping cart request. Were made in parallel, and when people changed an item quantity and then deleted it, sometimes completed first, and the item was re-added.
Oh,
that sounds like a nightmare to debug.
That's
a really good point. So if you are trying to essentially do 2 operations, one of, hey, I need to manipulate some data, whether or not you're creating data or updating or deleting, and then you want to essentially re-get that data to make sure that you have the latest, you need to make sure that the first operation is complete before you make the request to go get the updated data. So make sure that everything's updated first and then go get your new data.
Right. So then we get like to the asynchronous orchestration, which is like even crazier. But this one is actually solved very nicely on the read side with those resources, because everything is signals, right? And then like the request depends on a signal. So if I reference one resource in a request of another resource, then I kind of know when I loaded something. And then like there is like some, like the order has then like a list of product IDs. So in that like product resource, I can listen to those IDs from the order which I just loaded. So it's very nice to express like a declarative cascade of fetching the data with this new API. So this is actually very, very cool, that I have to say.
Definitely. So I was going to ask you, with the new HTTP resource, are we still thinking in streams, or is it a different mental model altogether?
It's signals. Everything is signals, which is amazing. And like that's exactly why it matters that we discuss those like abstract behaviors, because it actually doesn't matter if it's like a signal or RxJS observable or like promise. Those behaviors stay, and now we change like the actual API from observables to signals, but actually those behavior stays in the background, right? And there is like a switch behavior with the HTTP resource. But yeah, it's all signal based, which is amazing, because basically with signals we can pretend that everything is synchronous. We can read the value right now, and the Angular will trigger the thing at the right time. So like this asynchronous concern is completely taken over by the Angular, and from our perspective, if it changed, we will synchronously run it later, which is really amazing, which is very, very nice to work with, right? And all the APIs, I mean, like from the view child, content child, like the values, the inputs, the the resource, if everything is signals, then it becomes universally composable, which is just really pleasure to work with compared to like a world which we had before where we had the static properties and RxJS streams. And there was like this impedance or like a mismatch between the two, and we always had to convert from one to another. Now it just composes universally. It will run at the right time. Angular will schedule, the execution of whatever that is. Amazing.
But it also, everything is synchronous with a resource, but it also lets you know that, hey, there's some asynchronous things happening. I'm just going to tell you, I'm in the middle of something. I'll let you, and I'll switch my value back to let you know that I'm not working, being the loading or is loading
exactly
or signal on the resource object.
Exactly. So, and that's like the beauty of it, that they can take over like this heavy lifting. We can completely like kind of forget about the time, because we know like we will only exist in the now, and we will read the value, whatever that value is, even if it's like a status that something is happening and maybe we want to show the spinner, but we do not really care like that it happens later, because we are only implementing in the now, which is like a real beauty of signals, which maybe was not really like so visible on the first look, that even for the asynchronous APIs, it is possible to write it that way. And basically, like what happens there is, we are doing the request, right? So of course this takes a while, let's say half a second, but we kind of don't care, because like when it comes back, the signal will become dirty. So then Angular will know, actually, it's time to rerun the template of this component which is consuming this signal. And at that point of time, hey, it's a synchronous value again. Amazing.
Yep. That's the nice thing about signals, is that it allows you to get back to think about your applications as state. Your state may change, but your state is what it is at any given time. And the state may be that something is loading, in which case you show a spinner or whatever you do, and that's the current state. But that state's going to change, because eventually something's either going to be loaded or error, in which case you have values from the resource object to say, hey, you're not loading anymore, but there's an error, or you're not loading anymore, here's some data.
Do you guys think that moving to this signals first mindset is going to make it easier for newer Angular developers to like reason about async workflows, or do you think there's still like a mental leap there since it's kind of invisible in a way?
I'm trying to understand right now how my level of agreement of it being easier is over 100%, but it somehow is.
Yeah.
Again, you don't have to think about asynchronous things happening. You just have to think of, my current state of the application is this. And the first thing I thought of when I thought of signals in Angular, it goes to NGRX. I don't have to worry about asynchronous things happening, of this happened and this happens or anything. I need to know the state of my application. Sure, I can get that out of a selector, and I have that from the asynchronous thing because it changes. But now, here's that object. The values on that object may change, but here's your state. It's a signal.
But the beauty of it is that like it's not our problem. Like Angular will know, right? Like it was our problem when we were dealing with the streams, and like maybe it's a pending stream or hanging stream. Now it's not our problem. Like Angular will know exact point when it changed, and now we are again in the now. Okay, this is the state, as Mike said.
I think the hardest part for people to wrap their heads around signals, or not even so much to wrap their heads around, because it's pretty easy to wrap your head around, but the hardest thing to think about business rule wise while you're using signals is defining what the initial state should be. Because a signal needs to have a value, and whether or not you just
will always need to have a value.
Signals always have a value.
Always.
It's not going to be like next week. It's
no.
There is one cop out that I understand right now, and that's if you do an input dot required. It's like, hey, it's going to have an initial value because I'm making you give it to me. I just don't know what it is. I don't have to worry about it because you're using me as the component, and you're going to tell me exactly what this initial value is.
But at the time of execution is guaranteed to have a value, else it's an error. So from that perspective, it always has a value.
Besides the need for an initial value, is there any other risks though? Or do you think there's a risk to things being too abstracted? And
no,
you think it's a good thing for app stability?
I think it's actually less abstract.
Exactly as Mike says. Yeah, it's like, I mean, less. So like the genius of Signals is that like from the developer perspective, like the API which we are using as a developer, it's simple and it does what you want, and all that craziness is like hidden behind the scenes, because actually Signals are, let's say, 3 times as complicated as like ArcGIS, because ArcGIS is push primitive, like observable is like a push primitive, and Signals is push pull primitive. So
Wait, you just said the statement it's 3 times as complicated as RxJS, but it's so
I
much
would say
easier to
so.
understand for new
Yeah,
developers.
and that's the genius of that API, that like all that craziness is hidden and we do not need to care. It just does what you would expect it to do. Like the API was designed in such a way that we don't need to even understand that. But if we would dive deep in how it's done behind the scenes, then RxJS is just a push primitive, right? Like it just pushes the values, and Signals push dirtiness and then poll for if something actually changed, and then pull the current value, and there are like different phases and all this kind of stuff. So it's pretty crazy what it does behind the scenes, but yeah, we don't have to care. So that's why it's really cool that we get now also the API, like let's say httpResource or resource, which even signalifies that very like by the nature asynchronous thing, right? And that's why we want to explore how we could get that also for not just the read, but create, update, and delete as well.
Yes. Michael was saying all the initial state talk has made me rethink option values versus field with type undefined versus using null, etc.
Yeah, either pipe undefined or pipe null. The only thing I will advocate there is if you're going to say that the value may or may not be set, is consistency between use of null or undefined in your application.
Right.
The one thing I wanted to say is that the surface API of Signals is very, very simple. There's 3 different things you need to know about. 1, reading values is just empty in parentheses. And then there's 2 methods, set and update. And the constructor is essentially a set. But if you know set, update, and read, you are all set with Signals.
That's true. And I mean, like with the httpResource as well, right? Like you have like your value. Is it loading? Was there an error? And reload when you feel like it. Like it's like it's amazing.
Yeah. And then there's also the has value as well.
Right.
I was a little confused though, because right now it's just the R, right? It's just the but I was confused on like, it felt like that was supposed to be for all time, like we were only getting R, or was that not a right assumption that I made? Like was it one day a hope that we could do everything in a signal-based HTTP resource world, or are we just like in my mind, like the way it was written was like, here's R, don't ask for anything else. Is that not the vibe?
In my head, that's why I said at the beginning, I'm looking forward to talking about the C, the U, and the D. But R makes a whole lot of sense. And when you said we have the R, and I was like, what are you talking about? and to be clear for anybody who got confused like I did, R is for reading data out of CRUD. So the idea when
not the language
think of resources. When I think of resources, though, I'm thinking read with that. I think that there's a resource sitting on the server that I need to get data from, or sitting somewhere else that I need to get data from.
Right. So do we show something interesting?
Yeah.
Maybe.
You may show your screen. You ready?
Yeah. Let's try. So well, we
spoke that I want to talk about not just the R, but with the C, the U, and the D. I want to put them in a different order, and we can call that the duck.
Maybe
the update and the create.
That would be like, I mean, yeah, there are some, there was definitely room for improvement, right? So, let's just say if we didn't just use httpResource, because httpResource would look something like this. I mean, this is not it. This is something new, like some experiment. But httpResource would be just for loading, and that would be it. You could load, but then what if you want to delete stuff or create stuff, right? And it would not be really possible. We would have to create like a method, and in that method we would do like HTTP client and I mean, like we can quickly show what it would mean, right? So we would have to do like HTTP, and we would do like inject HTTP client. Oh my god, live coding on podcast. That's like a new thing which I never did.
Brave
But
soul.
it's never too late, right? HTTP post, we would do something like this, and and we would subscribe. So, and the thing is, if we would do this, like as we established, that any time I would click this, that those would happen in parallel. And for create, this is maybe good, but maybe also not, right? So this would be the merge behavior, but it would not be really easy to switch to a concat behavior. Actually, I do not know how on top of my head I would do something like this. It would also not be very easy to do something like optimistic updates, right? So, and of course, it's like a ArcGIS-based API. We are doing like multiple subscriptions and all this kind of stuff. And as we establish, it would be very nice to kind of forget about that whole ArcGIS story altogether. So what if instead of needing the HTTP client, we could have like a resource which doesn't only do R, but also the CUD, right? So we would not need the HTTP client. So, I mean, of course, the read can be taken care of behind the scenes by the actual HTTP resource, right? Okay, but then this create, update, and delete is something else. Now, of course, we would also be able to pass like some parameters to the underlying resource as like the resource supports it. So let's say we have something like a limit, and I uncomment this. So we are still in the R world, right? And then if I do, well, maybe I have to create some more items to actually see it in action. So here we are like reacting, right, to the our request object the same way as we would with the resource, but we also can do the delete. And here we see that even if I click them, they go one by one. So that means if I click them all, and it just takes a while, right? So that means that's like a concat behavior. Same for like the creation. If I create stuff, they are slowly coming because the default behavior is concat. So wouldn't it be cool if we could do something like specify that for remove, we would actually want a merge behavior instead of concat. And now, okay, this is not, oh yeah, okay, this is because of the page, so as I'm reloading. But now I see that it's just not like one by one, but if I'm clicking fast enough, that those requests are happening in parallel. And now if I actually opened the DevTools, which I actually usually use the Chrome, but for some reason my camera is not working in Chrome, so I had to so here we see like for the create, we still have concat behavior, so it's like a waterfall. It's like kind of like one by one, right? But now for the delete, okay, I was too fast. They are kind of happening at the same time, and I should have blocked like the multiple clicks and stuff like that. So wouldn't it be cool if we can specify which kind of behavior we want per like a operation? And what if we could also specify something like a strategy, and would say like, okay, we have an optimistic strategy. So then instead of like waiting for the request to go to the backend to actually delete the item and then reload the new collection without that item, we would remove them immediately in the UI. And now, of course, this breaks because I changed something before the demo and I was not paging correctly, but like remove it immediately in the UI. And then if the request is successful, nothing happens. But if the request failed, we would show like some error message and re-add that item. So
can you make your code a little bit larger, my darling? I thought I was the only one, but I am not the only blind person.
Try.
Hard of seeing person.
Oh yes.
Thank you.
Let's put this on the new line.
That's beautiful.
So that we see. So that's like a like a proof of concept of like something which could be called CRUD resource, which would not do just the read, but create, update, delete as well. And it would also allow us, it would have like some defaults, right? So like by default, it will do like the concat behavior and like the pessimistic strategy, which means that we would only ever confirm something if it was successful on the backend, but it would be possible to override for all those main operations which kind of behavior are we looking for. So I mean, the pessimistic is the default, and let's say we want the concat for creation because we are creating the trades and the order matters for the timestamp, but for the deleting we want the performance so we can do them at the same time, right? So it would be, I think, like this could solve quite some like use cases with a very nice API, and it would be very nice if we could get something like this from the official Angular resource. And maybe not as powerful, but I mean, why not? It would be very nice to be able to define these kind of things. And then basically we just call this method as many times as we want, and it doesn't really matter because behind the scenes it will apply the correct behavior through like the RxJS operator, but it's not our problem to make them, serially or in parallel, or like cancel the previous one, even though probably you would never want that, and it happens automatically on the read side. So, and that would be like the API, something like this, of course. Then we can also have like a global strategy, right? So that we want to set everything to optimistic, or if our items do not have IDs stored in like the ID property, we can provide an ID, like a function which says like actually that's like a custom ID. So we could override this as well. How does this look like, guys, for you at the first point, and also like the people in the chat? Would you like something like this?
Yes.
I just wanted to clarify.
I noticed you haven't scrolled up
pessimists-
though to show where you're importing it from.
Oh,
But that's
sorry.
okay. Don't do that now.
Well, unfortunately, it's just inline.
A local, okay.
But there is a gist on the GitHub, and there might be a library coming soon as well.
Okay.
Right.
No, I like the question. I do like that. So you also have the methods down below of the, not so much the create, but the toggle. That makes sense. But are you limited with this of what methods you can provide?
Right.
Or
so
are they set? Like, could
so
you
it's
put
like a
toggle
CRUD.
as a method on the resource?
No, currently not.
Okay.
Currently, it only supports, and that gets us like the topic of the limitations, because like compared to reading, this topic is like infinite, and there could be like different APIs and different endpoints.
Right.
So like it will never be able to solve everything, but many people work with like standard REST, right? And already if you have standard REST, you have, read, create, update, delete. And then you have also various like loading states, right? Like a global loading states for all of them, and loading, like initial loading if you want to show something like the skeletons, but then later on the reload you don't want to show skeletons anymore. So this can be also something nice, right?
I do have one question. So
yes, please.
With the behaviors of what's going on, so
Yeah.
more so with the toggle and the
Yeah.
delete, does it do a fetch, like a read?
Yes,
It does.
That's-
Okay.
that's a great question. Yeah.
Do you have a toggle in there to say, well, or is that your strategy of optimistic of whether or not it refetches?
Exactly. So currently, when the strategy is set to optimistic and there is no specific param, it will not refetch.
Okay.
But that's actually like, this brings us to like a very cool question which we can pose ourselves, which is like, how do we determine if whenever we do like some kind of mutation on the backend, like create, update, delete, if we want to refetch the collection from the backend again, right? So like one thing which we could do already is if it's optimistic and it didn't fail, then we don't do it. So that way we like reduce the network traffic, right? And like the server time. Another thing could be that there is like another option which can determine like for which one we always want to reload or not, right? So that will be like something which would definitely make sense to add. And like for the folks in the chat, like basically the name for this concept, if I remember correctly, is something called like CQRS, which is command query separation or something like this, which basically means that whenever we make like a backend request, like with the mutation, we do not want it to return the result, but we want to actually refetch independently. And this can work great under some circumstances, but can be also terrible for performance under other circumstances. If we have like a huge collection, maybe we do not have paging, right? Because with the page, even if we like refetch that page where we did a mutation is not a big deal. But if our API would return 10,000 items and it would not support pagination, then probably we would not want to go with the CQRS because it would be really, really bad for our performance, right? Does that make sense, Mike?
Absolutely.
Right. So that would be something which would be worth adding to that library, which would allow us to specify even like, I don't know, like, because we already have behavior for like this merge concat, but like another level of configuration, like it's like, I don't know, refetch true or something like that.
Yeah. I like this. This going back to talking about NGRX, this is very similar to what I remember from. I haven't used it personally, but just know of it. The NGRX data
Exactly.
that I know that John Papa and Ward Bell worked on.
Exactly.
The idea of taking, all right, I have these things that I do a lot.
Right. Right.
And I'm doing a lot of similar things there. The same API endpoint of what you're hitting, but you're hitting it with different methods, HTTP method types.
Right. Yeah, that's actually like a very cool thing to bring up because it kind of would also show us like the future of the limitations, because this kind of approach gets you far, but then once you realize you have like some custom cases, it doesn't work anymore, right? So like one thing which is very important is that like those API endpoint must be like conform to the REST specification, right? If you also update your things with post, then this in this current state it will not work, right? So and then you can keep adding those additional configurations, but at some point it's just too much. So at some point you want to like, okay, so this is like the set of limitations, and if you fulfill them, this gets you really far. But if you need something custom, then that's a problem. And I think that's also like kind of like the main reason why Angular team might be a little bit hesitant to add something like this into the framework itself, because just this mutation story has infinite variability.
It does. So I like what you're thinking there. The other possibility is that for each of these subsequent methods or sections of like create and remove, you could potentially also add an API endpoint there. So if people aren't doing like true REST, it's like to-dos is a get, and then maybe there's a to-do /update, to-do /delete, or whatever it ends up being, that you could do that.
Create mutation, something like this. So it would be just like for one part, and then it would have like fully configurable. That would be also like something, or even just like, so we have like HTTP.
I was even thinking like in line. So right after line 51 of saying, all right, for create, the API endpoint is this. And
right.
Then...
Right. So that's exactly a good one, right? So here we could have something like refetch. That's like this CQRS thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we could have like custom endpoint or like custom request even.
Yeah.
That provide like how to make like a request. That would be a possibility, and that could actually solve it to like even much higher degree, and that's a great idea. Another thing which I can imagine is like we have like the httpResource, right? And maybe Angular team could provide something like a very generic HTTP mutation, which would be something like this, but for like one.
Oh, yeah, as a common type of what it does. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So that would be like another one. And then because you would always provide this custom request and the behavior and whatever, and you would have to kind of compose them by yourself. So this would kind of fall out because you would do that orchestration between like the mutation and refetching. So that would be also a possibility. So as we see, like there is, it's all open, and there is really not so easy to say like what would be the optimal solution, because just different folks have different set of requirements and constraints.
You have two questions in the chat. If you
please
have a second, is it possible to update two different entities at the same time? And also, is it possible to react to an action from outside, like a trigger notification or like trigger a notification?
it would be. So I mean, let's say we had like 2 editors or like double editor or whatever. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, here we just have like a single update which just toggles, but here we could, we could do like this, and we can do like for the to do 1 and to do 2 if we have like some multi-editor or like a batch edit. Let's just say we have a batch edit, and we go like through all the 4 to-dos. Yeah, we could do that, and then we would say, okay, for the update, actually, we would like to have a. No, there is no such thing. And we would say this, yes, and they can happen in parallel, and it could like immediately come to UI, right? So this would be definitely possible. So the same thing goes like if there is like some kind of notifier, or that just notifier just has to call that method, right? As long as we call that method, or I mean, this is just the method from the template, but as long as we call this method, it's just going to happen. And it will be conforming to what we are defining here. So if we say merge, it will be in parallel. If we do concat, it will be one after the other, right?
Yeah. I really like that. And then the really, really mean question in chat was this one here. Which is, I mean, like down the road. I mean,
the best questions, because this like brings you to like, okay, I didn't think about it. So how can we make it even better for the folks out there?
Yeah. That's like issue number 2 on the repo when it gets created. It's like, yeah, future release, and it gets pushed back and pushed back. Definitely not part of an MVP. I absolutely love this idea.
So you have actually a lot of people in the chat who concur with the loving of the idea, or having worked on something like that worked similar to what you're describing.
100%. Yeah.
A lot of people are hoping that it can show up in Angular, as like a native thing. But
so as you've played with this, my question is, can you go back to where you were looking at the other code for the to-do component? So is your envisionment, as you create a CRUD resource as to-dos, that resource would then fully get exposed publicly? For say you put it in a service, right? You have a to-do service. Would you keep that CRUD resource private within there and have like accessor methods? Or would you say, I've created this to-dos resource, go ahead and do whatever the heck you want with it?
Like, I would say it depends like how much business logic we have around that. So in this specific case, when we anyway just directly call these methods, and there is no like before, we don't have to do something crazy before we can like update.
Yeah.
Then of course we could expose the resource itself, because there's this nice public API. But if the business logic is that here is like 100 lines of code before we call the update, then I would keep that resource private and only expose the service methods.
Okay. If that's the case, and I think that what it would be nice also, and there may already be something in there. So with the idea of a writable signal, you can do .as read only. It's a very nice helper method of, hey, I'm going to expose this thing, but there you go. To have something similar on resources as well.
Right. That actually makes perfect sense. Let me quickly look how it is. Yes, exactly. So instead of doing this, I would say just as, how is it? Should be like...
I think loading is read only. I think that's a signal versus a...
Let's do mine. Let's see if that works.
Value is a writable signal.
Okay. So I would have to check that, but yeah, 100% like that would be like some additional layer of safety to make sure that people
or you could even make a public like dot private resource or whatever that would just have those properties as read only to be able to have it in there without, so that you don't have to re-expose loading, you don't have to manually re-expose error, those things.
Right. No, that makes perfect sense. And like you could see here that actually like the CRUD resource uses actual like RX resource behind the scenes. Currently, maybe we'll switch to HTTP resource, but like we do not expose this internal resource. So the CRUD resource just has its own API and is loading and error states and like create, update, delete. But that's about it. Right. Okay. But yeah, I mean, this is, let's stop sharing. So this is like a very early proof of concept. I didn't have much time to play with it. I just like when I saw like what people were experimenting on, social media.
Yeah, people
like,
were asking, where can I try this?
I will share the link to the gist on the, let's say, in the YouTube comments.
Nice.
I guess like that's where most folks are, or like I can send it to you guys and you can.
I can put it in the description.
Exactly. And I mean, like if I update it, you see that like the whole history, right, in this GitHub gist, right? So you can always see like you can get the latest version, you can see like the older versions if you want something simpler. So definitely.
Oh my gosh,
see in
guys,
the
we
chat,
are
like,
at the top of the hour, but like this was amazing. I freaking love this episode. Chat, you were awesome. Thomas, is there anything that you wanted to cover, touch on, point to before we wrap?
I think, just really like a huge disclaimer. I just, play with this like one afternoon, right? It's really just like about like seeing what could be, and like also like I think that I provided this like in like the RFC like link to that, just like as an example. But of course, the ideal case would be if we got something official, right? That's always the best because then it's maintained for the long term, like the quality will be on like the Angular official quality, right? Not like the afternoon, like you play with the TypeScript, like you do the generic types, you have the GPT on your side, but then still like the arguments, even though they are correctly typed, that says like args instead of ID, and you don't know how to solve it, right? So there is like a limit to what's possible with like a limited amount of resource and experience. But I think it could be very cool.
Awesome. Mike, you got any comments? Anything you want to?
No, I'm wondering if it would be, because I don't know if this would get too official, like coming directly from the team. However, if we potentially have like some solid resource utilities, where a place where you can go to do those. I have, and not to pat myself on the back, but I have one. So if you have multiple signals, and I don't want to get into a big conversation about it, but if you have multiple signals, the way you combine them is to use computed.
Right.
However, I think that resources go well beyond what a default signal is, and I created something called computed resource.
Oh, right.
That if you have two different resources from talking to two different things, but maybe you deal with things together, customers and orders, or orders and order details, to be able to have a single resource to know with a single loading indicator, a single error indicator, and getting back a map of the resources provided, is the idea behind that. So things like this that are similar resources.
Are you like sending us a link to that too, Mike?
Oh yeah,
I brought it up.
Please.
All right, I promise to put both once the boys get me these links in the description of the video. So check it out.
So Mike, basically, like instead of like we having to make like a loading computer which would like merge those loadings from the resources, like it does this
internally
behind the scenes, and you just get like the nice thing. Okay. Yep. Oh, that's cool. That's cool.
And then the data that comes out is you give it a map of name : resource, and then you would get out the value would be name : a value.
Okay. Okay.
Basically a map, but just a JavaScript object.
So what's the magic which is powering this behind the scenes?
I just wrote the logic to combine it. I did also two different strategies of the loading, whether or not it was some or all.
Okay.
For that.
Okay. Well, that's very cool.
Did you see the question, Mike?
I did not. Kind of like combined latest.
No, there is more.
Yes. So and then reload also would reload all. Although I did do a partial reload and a partial value. So you can get just one value out that's based off the keys, and you can also reload based off of one. So the value would be just like combined latest.
We went from to
I forgot. I had to think because I haven't looked at it in probably a month or two.
I was beautiful. I love the brain working live out loud. That was beautiful. Thank you, Mike.
But like the flagship use case for that is like when we want to do like multiple things in parallel, like multiple resources in parallel, not like a cascade, right?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. And it's like a library, or is it like
I have it up in a repo. I haven't published it, but it's there if you wanted to go look at the code. I shared the link to Alyssa here in the chat.
Excellent.
So, amazing.
I'm going to put that in the chat real quick. Perfect. And then I will put it in the description as well, but for everybody who's watching live and wants to play with it. And then do you have your gist as well, Thomas? Because I can throw that up on screen.
Yes.
If not.
Yes. I will try to.
This one is Mike's.
Yes.
And
1 second, please. Gists. The gist of it.
I should have put mine into gist as well.
I know, right? Come on, get with the coolness.
I
did try to build a demo app
perfect.
as well.
Awesome.
The
And then
gist
here
of it,
is
but that's the old one without the. Yeah, I will update it. Like now that this happened, I'm kind of motivated to bring it further, especially this amazing feedback. So
yeah,
so definitely I probably will play with it tomorrow before lunch.
Oh, thank you so much. This was such a great conversation. I love the ideas. I know you boys don't have hope that it will make it into native Angular, but I do.
I kind of do. They have been very, very nice lately. And
now's the time for your crazy ideas, people. Let's go.
Yeah, no, we got so much cool stuff recently. Yeah.
Oh, do you guys have anything you want to highlight this week for a pick as far as technical, not technical? Anything you want to shout out to?
I do not.
What about you, Thomas?
So that would be a very different topic, but I'm a huge fan of metal music, right? And now it's this. I'm also I'm not that old, but I'm a bit older. So and now it's this revival of this new metal, or not new metal music from the early 2000s, and the bands Limp Bizkit are touring again. And I just caught them in Zurich 2 weeks ago, and there's a huge stadium, everybody jumping front to back.
Did you go?
Oh yeah. Oh, mosh pit and everything. So I'm now is this revival after 20 years, and probably there will not be another one. So if you like this kind of stuff,
I do.
Then go catch them, do some mosh pit.
This is absolutely a great call out. Although I didn't know
get hurt, have a good
metal.
time, scream your lungs out, and remember.
I've only ever survived one mosh pit, but I'm definitely willing to try again. So
sometimes you need a little bit of adrenaline in your life, right?
True.
Well, I think,
and it's not that dangerous in Switzerland.
It's not okay. Mine was in New York, and it was
okay. Well,
it was terrifying.
That's a different beat
I didn't know what was happening. I just wanted a great view of the band, and then it happened. I was in the wrong spot.
Do you remember which band was that? Still,
All State Champs. I'm a punk rock girl, so that's why I was like, wait, is Limp Bizkit metal? Because they kind of crossover with things that I love.
Rap metal, new metal. Yeah. Was amazing.
Oh, good stuff. Well, I'm gonna go look up their tour dates and see if they're coming near me. So thank you. That was a good shout out. Awesome. Well, I think we're gonna sign off for this afternoon or evening, depending on where you are in the world. But seriously, thank you so much. It was a killer episode, and I appreciate the work that you do in the community. And thank you so much for coming on with us.
Thank you for having me, Alyssa. Mike, was a pleasure. Thank you all the folks for great question and just hype in the chat, and the call outs was amazing.
Absolutely.
Until next time. Thank you.
Until next time. Bye, everybody.